Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Who knows if it ends in tragedy or comedy, but the New York Knicks are going to end in a memorable way. Also, the Bucs season may be officially over, and the Panthers are hiding Bryce Young for a potential trade. It's obvious, right?
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
The New York Knicks swung two monster trades in the offseason, and for many were viewed as the contender in the Eastern Conference to knock off the Boston Celtics. On opening night, on ring night, on banner night in Boston, it was a banner night in Boston, but for the Celtics, not the New York Knicks. Nearly set a 3-point record for the defending champs, a 132-109 win over the Knicks. Gavin Shaw from Locked On Knicks joins me now. And Gavin, what happened? How did this all go down?
The Celtics, I've been saying all summer, the Celtics were a historically great team last year, one of the 5 best net ratings in the history of basketball. I've maybe this is a little Knicks homerism and I'm trying to reverse jinx, but I've said it's an embarrassment if they don't win a championship this year. Right now, it looks like they're not going to get embarrassed, Peter. It's not going to be an issue because they are extraordinary. Should have set the all-time NBA record for threes in a game, had it with about 7 minutes left, missed their last 12 threes. But the Knicks defensively are not ready yet. All preseason, there was just a lack of physicality. They weren't really on point with the rotations. Karl Anthony Towns is obviously very different in terms of what they've had in terms of rim protection relative to Mitchell Robinson and Isaiah Hartenstein a year ago. But the whole premise of them having OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, right, was to cover up for a lot of this. Two guys who could presumably guard Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown one-on-one, keep you out of rotation. That did not happen tonight, whether it was Mikal Bridges getting caught up on screens or Anunoby just being kept out of the actions altogether. The Knicks were constantly in rotation, constantly conceding open shots, and Boston made them pay every single time.
Yeah, Jason Tatum, 37 points on 14 of 18. He was 8 of 11 from deep after he could not buy a bucket in the Olympics. It was pretty remarkable to watch. You mentioned the addition of Mikal Bridges and him pairing with OG Anunoby. They were supposed to be the antidote on the wing to this Boston Celtics team. Just because they weren't in game one doesn't mean they can't be. So how much of this are you just going to chalk up? Hey, it's one game. We've seen shooting variance in the league has made these kind of blowout games really ramp up in the last few years because a team can shoot 50% from three, shoot 63s, and all of a sudden you're going to lose by 20 plus. But how much of this is just, hey, this is game one and there's plenty of runway to figure this out?
Look, the best shooting game or tied for the best shooting game in NBA history is inherently an anomaly, right? No matter how bad your defense is. There's been a lot of bad defense in the NBA. There's been one other night where a team made this many threes. So you certainly take it with a grain of salt in that sense. That being said, I do think there are real concerns here and real stuff to fix up. I mean, the Knicks knew going into the season, Karl Anthony Towns was not going to be a great rim protector, but maybe even more concerning is just how the Knicks use him on defense. He had his best season in Minnesota where they played like a hyper aggressive defensive scheme. Had him up at the level. That's not really Tom Thibodeau style. He likes to use a shallow dropper in the pick and roll the defenders in a bit of a back pedal. Not going to work against the Boston Celtics. Too much shooting, too much skill across the board. And that is going to be something the Knicks are trying to figure out all year because they made this Towns move specifically to beat the Boston Celtics. So that's a concern. He kind of is who he is defensively. So it just kind of comes down to how well you can insulate him. Certainly getting Mitchell Robinson and Precious Achiuwa back, who went out with that hamstring injury in the last game of the preseason, will make a difference in the Knicks' physicality. I thought the Knicks were really lacking in terms of rebounding in this one. At least until late in the fourth quarter, only had 4 offensive rebounds. The Celtics, meanwhile, were killing them on the glass, getting a lot of their threes that way. Of course, that is usually like what the Knicks do and how the Knicks beat teams. So that is something to think about and something that Towns, he had a good showing in the preseason, did not look so good tonight. And then Mikal Bridges is the other point I'm watching. Anunoby, though I think he could be moving a little bit better. I don't really have any real concerns about defensively. Bridges certainly is not the same guy he was on the Suns, at least on the Nets. He looked much closer to his Nets version than his Suns version today. They're going to need to get him back to that Suns version where he finished second in the NBA in Defensive Player of the Year voting. If they're going to have any chance against this team, Jason Tatum was playing with him. That's just not going to work for the Knicks.
I know I just asked, hey, it's just one game. But if you were the kind of person coming in going, the Knicks kind of sacrificed a big piece of their identity, the grit, the hustle. Isaiah Hartenstein out the door, Dante DiVincenzo out the door. You mentioned the rebounding here. That's not going to be something that Karl Anthony Towns is going to hang his hat on necessarily. And we know what the limitations are defensively. Are you concerned at all that the Knicks robbed Peter to pay Paul in all of this?
A little bit. I mean, it just inherently you have to give to get, right? Obviously, Hardenstein was out of their control. That didn't have anything to do with getting Bridges or getting Towns. DiVincenzo would help just because of his toughness, his athleticism. I think his activity was maybe the biggest thing that was missing tonight, because we saw, I mean, if you want to base it off tonight and have quick reactions, right? Deuce McBride, pretty clean replacement for what you want from Dante DiVincenzo. He had a better game than Dante ever had against the Boston Celtics. And I think 5 tries last year. So that was certainly encouraging offensively, but I think just the fact that you had Dante, Hart, and Hartenstein all on the floor together in the playoffs around Jalen Brunson, right? It made up for a lot of Jalen Brunson's weaknesses because those guys were so quick, so reactive, so good playing passing lanes, flying over to block shots, flying in for offensive rebounds. You lose 2/3 of that. Obviously, you hope Anunoby defensively can bring a lot of that, and he's nominally the best of the group at those things. Mikal Bridges, obviously from that same Nova system, he'll have better nights. He had a better second half. Josh Hart needs to shoot the basketball, but if he's on the floor, he is always going to bring that. So there is definitely a loss there. Again, I want to see them with Precious and Mitch because I think they will bring a lot of that, particularly in terms of offensive rebounding.
Stay up to date on the New York Knicks all year long by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Knicks on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up, the Bucs' chances of making a postseason run are over. Before we get to why Alvin Kamara is going to retire a Saint, it looks like. If you're a big NFL fan and you're looking for a big return, look no further than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Plus, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And you can have a look at some Week 8 lines in the NFL. The Cincinnati Bengals trying to crawl back to 500. But the Philadelphia Eagles stand in their way on Sunday. FanDuel actually likes the Bengals by 2.5 points at home. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Saints and Alvin Kamara got a contract extension signed on Tuesday.
The New Orleans Saints and Alvin Kamara get a 2-year, $24.5 million contract extension done, effectively locking Alvin Kamara and the New Orleans Saints together through the 2026 season. This is an extension that has been in the works for a while, something New Orleans Saints needed to get done a long time ago. But hey, as they say, better late than never. This is a big time move that the Saints needed to get done. I'm glad that they finally got it done. Now, I understand that the New Orleans Saints are on a 5-game losing streak. It's very hard to look at this team right now and maybe have some positive sentiment around them. I understand that. I'm not trying to feed you false optimism and all those other things, but this is a move that needed to get done for the New Orleans Saints. And to me, that's the most important part.
Stop me if you've heard this one before. Joel Embiid and Paul George are not going to be available. That's true. The Sixers announced the two stars will miss the opening game against the Milwaukee Bucks tonight. Embiid, who didn't play in the preseason for what the team called left knee injury management, will miss not just Wednesday's game, but also Friday's game in Toronto, plus potentially Sunday's game in Indiana. George will be reevaluated later this week after he suffered a hyperextended left knee that left him with a bone bruise. That was October 14th against the Atlanta Hawks. The Bucks will also be without Chris Middleton to open their season. The LA Dodgers will go with Jack Flaherty for Game 1 of the World Series, pitting him against New York Yankees ace and fellow Southern California product Garrett Cole at Dodger Stadium Friday night. The Dodgers will follow Flaherty with Yoshinobu Yamamoto in Saturday's Game 2, allowing both of them to make 2 starts if the series prolongs. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers fell to the Baltimore Ravens 41-31 on Monday night, and they added injury to insult. Chris Godwin, a dislocated ankle. He is out indefinitely. Mike Evans has a hamstring injury that, according to Todd Bowles, is causing him quite a bit of pain. The expectation is he's going to be reevaluated in about a month. That's the earliest we're probably going to see him here. James Yarko from Locked on Bucs joins me now. And James, this is a Buccaneers team that we were just chatting and you were saying, Baker Mayfield has an outside MVP case, that this is a team that has a chance to compete really in the NFC. And today it feels very different.
Yeah, everything changed in that moment. And early in the game, it's frustrating because you see Mike Evans go down and you're hoping it's not serious. You're hoping maybe he misses a week or two, but they can withstand that because they have Chris Godwin. Then they lose Chris Godwin, and it feels like the life was sucked out of Buccaneers fans. All the hope had eviscerated with Godwin as he was carted off the field in an air cast with under a minute to play. And, it's frustrating because Baker was having a MVP caliber season. Now you're looking at Mike Evans' 1,000-yard streak being in serious jeopardy. If he returns after the bye week, he would have to average 95 yards per game the rest of the season to hit that mark for the 11th year in a row and tie Jerry Rice's record. But more importantly than all that, you had Godwin, who was at the top of all the receiving statistics in the league in a contract year, making himself some serious money, finally healthy. After that torn ACL that he suffered in 2021, and it was just a gut punch for Buccaneers fans. So it's really hard to tell where the season is going to go at this point, and whether or not this could be the start of maybe the end of the Todd Bowles era, and maybe they look to move to Liam Cohen.
Yeah, and there are some trade opportunities that they're going to have. We got the reporting yesterday that Cooper Kupp potentially on the market. It seems pretty obvious right now that the Rams are shopping him, if the reporting is to be believed. Mike Williams in New York, another guy who could be available. We'll see what else shakes loose. There's always one or two surprises that we get around trade deadlines, at least names that we start to hear. Without asking you if you think they're going to make a move, because today, in the wake of all this, I think that's a hard thing to try and come to grips with. But what do you think they will base the decision on when it comes to how aggressive they want to be?
It'll be a lot of factors, whether or not there's a guy that they feel they're willing to give up the capital and the money for because they feel that they can compete. I'm not sure that they have a defense that can compete, when you start to get into the playoffs. They have an offense that can go they had an offense that can go toe to toe with anyone. But then you also have to factor in the money. Like Cooper Kupp, in theory, for the Buccaneers, sounds like a great idea. This was his offensive coordinator in Los Angeles that would be in Tampa. Chris Godwin was playing the Cooper Kupp role in this offense. Right. So why not bring in Cooper Kupp to play the Cooper Kupp role? Well, even if the Rams eat a lot of the money, you're still looking at $20 million in 2025. You're kissing Chris Godwin goodbye. If you trade for Cooper Kupp, Godwin is gone. They're not going to have the money for Evans and Godwin and Kupp. So that's,
and they're duplicative. So that's you've just made your decision.
Right. And so is this a team where a move like that is going to move the needle far enough? I don't think so. I could see them going for a Mike Williams, but he doesn't really replace what Chris Godwin was doing. He doesn't fit into that role. He's affordable and he helps the depth. I can't imagine DeAndre Hopkins is happy in Tennessee, but that's another, you're going to have to work something out as far as the money is concerned. But ultimately, when you look at this team, they have a massive hole at inside linebacker. They have an inability to be able to consistently pressure the quarterback. They have half of the corners that they came into the season with on injured reserve or out for the year. So at this point, it's like the Bucs might be better off just kind of moving forward with what they have, focusing on making sure Godwin comes back in 2025 and beyond, and then fixing some of these holes. They're set up for a potential run in 2025 if they fix a couple of these little pieces, but I don't think it's worth it to risk the future for a run to the divisional round.
Stay up to date on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers all year long by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Bucs on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, the Panthers are hiding Bryce Young so as to trade him. Maybe. Carolina Panthers are a train wreck. With Bryce Young, they were bad. And without Bryce Young, they are still very bad. Locked On NFL host Tyler Rowland thinks it's crazy the Panthers won't play him. But Luke Braun presented an alternate explanation for the Panthers' decision on a recent Locked On NFL pod.
I just think that's absolutely insane. What is the upside of playing Andy Dalton? What is the upside? You're a terrible team with Andy Dalton. Bryce Young, I said this when they benched him. You play Bryce Young and he leads you to a top pick in this year's draft, or he plays a little bit better. And again, Dave Canales was brought in to develop Bryce Young. So if the answer is you want to continue to hide Bryce Young, so you might be able to trade him in the offseason and you just don't want people to realize how bad he stinks, so you're trying to take that away, I think the cat's out of that bag. If teams are still interested in Bryce Young, they're not going to be scared off of him based on the rest of it. Just makes no sense to me. There is no upside to Andy Dalton whatsoever. Luke, I know that this topic is not fun, but let us know how you feel.
It hit me like a Jimmy Neutron brain blast that they are trying to hide him to trade him, not by the offseason, right now. Right now. What happens week 9 won't matter to an off season, or what happens, week 7, week 8 won't happen to an off season trade, but it'll matter to a trade deadline trade because it's just what's so fresh in your mind. So hiding him for that, look, only second year, everybody still has their draft grades on all their 2023 guys, including Bryce Young, and somebody had a high draft grade on him, might still be able to flip him. I think if I'm Carolina,
Luke, who should trade for him? What team do you think makes the most sense to trade for him?
Cleveland.
Before I get to my thoughts on this theory, the Panthers announced that Andy Dalton was involved in an automobile accident Tuesday afternoon in Charlotte. No one in the vehicle was transported by emergency medical personnel to the hospital. However, Dalton was being evaluated by team medical personnel. It sounds like everything is all right, which is good news. I can see why the Panthers would want to trade Bryce Young. It's over. If he's going to have a Sam Darnold-like renaissance or a Baker Mayfield-like renaissance, it is going to have to be somewhere else. Sam Darnold had to go to the Jets and to the 49ers and to the Panthers before he could have this season with the Minnesota Vikings. Baker Mayfield with the Browns had some success. Then they moved on for Deshaun Watson, which I think they would probably take back if you ask them. Mayfield had to also go to the Panthers, the Rams, and now has found a home in Tampa Bay. This is just not going to work in Carolina. But what are you getting? What are you getting? And if the answer is pert near nothing, then you just keep him on the team because Andy Dalton is not the long-term solution. We know that. So you're going to be bad. That's fine. If you need to go into this draft, not a great quarterback draft by all accounts, by the way, you have Bryce Young on the roster. That's fine. If you don't like any of these quarterbacks, not that Bryce Young is the answer, but you have someone, you have the Teddy Bridgewater, and you hope that the rest of your roster is improved enough over the next year to make that at least workable. Here's the problem. I'm not sure it's workable. I'm not sure Bryce Young is an NFL quarterback, period, full stop. I'm not sure even in good situations he can play. Except, of course, against the Joe Barry Packers defense last year. And finally, Aaron Rodgers knows what's eating the Jets. They're not having enough fun. Yeah, that's the problem. Rodgers told Pat McAfee that the Jets are playing with too much anger and not enough enjoyment. Has he considered ayahuasca in the Gatorade? Just something to think about. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Locked On Sports Today, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. If Aaron Rodgers' teammates aren't having fun, I wonder if he considered not throwing them under the bus in those interviews or pouting or just generally being a petulant teammate. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, will the Rams get an upset win in prime time? Probably not. It sounds like they're going to trade Cooper Kupp. So at least until tomorrow, stay Locked On Sports Today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
Go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.